This episode is brought to you by National Geographic, presenting its new documentary film, Endurance. Follow the greatest survival story ever told, unpacking the legendary feat of polar explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton, who kept his crew alive for over a year, despite losing their ship in frigid pack ice. Over a century later, a team of modern-day explorers set out to find the sunken ship. Endurance, now streaming on Hulu and Disney+.
Time to move? Skip the hassles of selling during the holiday season and sell your home directly to Opendoor. Request an all-cash offer in minutes, close, and get paid in days. You can even pick your close date so you can move after New Year's. Start your move at opendoor.com or download the Opendoor app. Opendoor is represented by Opendoor Brokerage Inc., license 02061130 in California, and Opendoor Brokerage LLC in its other markets. Terms and conditions apply.
At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Some skill, yeah.
I am fine. I'm still trying to find this stupid movie, though.
Well, okay.
Something 1984, horror movie.
Real specific.
Horror movie.
Yeah, I mean, like Fear Street, but that's like 1994 or something, right? Dude, I can't believe Halloween's over, man.
I know, dude.
It sucks.
Wait, are we going to do the intro?
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad. We're a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and trying to raise our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. We're your hosts, Woody Brown.
And Tyler Bentz.
What's up, man?
Hey, pal.
Like I was trying to say before you interrupt me with pressing the intro song button.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe Halloween's over, dude. It went by way too fast.
It really did. It really did. I felt like the whole month just kind of like sped by. Like the month before, it felt like really slow. Like, oh man, it's building up, and then
boom, it's gone.
We're done. Yeah.
Is it because we're looking forward to it so much? Is that what speeds it up? Like how?
I think so. And actually, it's funny you say that. I read an article a while back that said experiencing new things actually slows down the perception of time. So like that's why kids, for us adults, it feels like everything's just speeding by because we've already discovered everything. But for kids, it's like it sort of slows down everything for them.
Man.
Which is pretty interesting.
That is really interesting. And it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Huh.
So
well,
maybe
that means we need to try new stuff.
Well, and not only that, but I think like maybe us being like excited about this, the month of our October Spooktacular, like we were like gearing up for it, and we were like researching topics and all that kind of stuff. Maybe like that was like slowing down September.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. That makes sense too. But I don't know. Something about like, can I just say though that I am excited about the upcoming holidays. I love Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
I love Christmas.
Yeah.
So in general, and I love New Year's too. Mm-hmm. All that to say, even though we're out of the spooky season, we just can't quite get out of the spooky season.
Yeah.
And that's why we're talking about what we're talking about today.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel like if you're a big reader, you've probably, like, especially like fiction and paranormal, I'm talking to you, Clay, but you've probably kind of like brushed up against the idea of this. Maybe it's not the exact same thing, but the concept of like rooms disappearing.
Well, hold on. Even before that, dude, typically when you think of that kind of stuff, when you think about any kind of disappearances, the first thing that comes to mind is people, right?
Oh, yeah.
You've got people that just vanish out of thin air. All these mysteries, people, sometimes objects, you were about to say.
Or rooms, or if you're a Stephen King, well, I don't want to get into that yet because that kind of gives it away. But if you're a fan of Stephen King, you probably sort of roughly get around this. Oh, actually, another good example is, it's sort of like platform 9 3/4 at with like Harry Potter. So where it's like this sort of this thing that's like existing but like invisible. Is that I don't know. Is that a good way to say it? I'm not real sure.
Yeah. So confident.
I feel like it's tied to this though.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. I think let's stop batting around the invisible bush here, and let's just talk about this. So now imagine this, folks. Imagine walking along a quiet path. Maybe it's, misty outside. Twilight might just be setting in, and you look up, and there's a house. Something pretty grand, like almost out of a storybook. But when you come back, so you're walking through your neighborhood, for example. You're walking through it. You've been there a million times, but when you round a corner, you see a house that you might not have noticed before. And as you circle back around and you come by later, it's gone. Not abandoned or decayed and, a clump of ruins or anything and overgrown, but just completely gone, vanished out of thin air. Now, when I first heard about this kind of stuff, I thought, what? I've never heard of that. Like I mentioned earlier, we've heard of situations where people have vanished, objects, sometimes even like, think about the famous ones. You've got, things the mysteries that we would read about when we were kids, like that would happen around the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, God, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Big objects like that, such as planes, boats, but not houses.
Yeah.
So today, we're going to be diving into something that's going to kind of keep us in the spooky season. And we're going to talk about these strange stories of what they call these so-called phantom houses, places that seem to slip in and out of our world. Maybe it's a glimpse into the past or something even weirder. Buckle up, folks. These are some spooky ones.
Oh, I love it.
First up, let's take a trip to France. Versailles, to be exact. It was the early 1900s when two English women, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, decided to visit the gardens surrounding the I know I'm saying it wrong. Petite Trianon. I don't know if that's right.
That's right.
Which is this small chateau that Marie Antoinette would retreat to. Now, as they strolled through these famous grounds, something strange happened. The whole world around them suddenly seemed to shift. They described feeling this heavy atmosphere, like a veil had fallen. And suddenly, they weren't just in a garden, and they were walking through what seemed to be the 18th century. All around them, they saw people in old-fashioned clothing, gardeners with tricorn hats, and even women in powdered wigs. And they claimed to have seen a woman seated sketching on a bench, a woman they believed was Marie Antoinette herself. They're overcome by this sort of surreal feeling, as I think we all would be. Later on, when they returned to that area, they couldn't find the path that they had taken before. Parts of the garden that had been there on that day simply weren't anymore. Their experience was so vivid, so undeniable to them, that they ended up writing a book called An Adventure, where they shared every eerie detail of their walk through what they believed to be a literal time slip. Now, this one in particular, I swear to goodness we've talked about before.
I think we have too. I don't know if this...
And I don't know if it was just between you and I as a conversation or if this related to another case that we talked about in terms of time slippage and things like that. What sucks is, like, I always learn about these things and there just happens to be a book and I'm like, dang it.
I know.
I should have read the book, and then I haven't read the book yet.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear if any listeners have ever heard of the aptly titled An Adventure. But I remember the reason why I think we've talked about it is, to me, this is one of those stories where, I think ultimately it was probably just explained away by these people are just making it up because there's no proof, right? They're just like, all of a sudden they're witnessing these people dressed in this old clothing And this is still like early 1900s, but still 18th century clothing.
Very different.
Very different, very strange. Even seeing someone that they believe to be Marie Antoinette herself. I mean, we'll talk about later. I want to dive into like what our theories are, but this one seems pretty clear what we would think, Yeah. There's not a whole lot of, directions to go with that one. But let's dive into this next one. All right, this next one. So we started off with this Versailles tale because I think, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, not only have we potentially talked about it, no, we have, but it's also kind of like the one that I think might be sort of the most referred to, or at least I had heard of it before,
Yeah.
Where they just feel like they're in another place. This next story, though, is really legitimately, when Tyler briefly described what had happened here, I was like, yep, doing it. Yeah. I know it's not Halloween. I know we're out of the spooky season, but this is just super cool. And it's a great way to kind of bridge into the next part of the year. And this is the reason, this story here, and the ones to follow. So now let's jump to England, Suffolk to be exact, in the 1860s. There's a farmer named Robert Paddington Bear. Yep. On one summer evening, Palfrey was baling hay when he suddenly was overcome by a biting chill, despite the otherwise warm air. When he looked up, he claims to have seen a majestic and pristine red brick house surrounded by green gardens looming nearby. Now keep in mind, he had never seen this before in all of his years in the area. I don't know about you, but I can almost picture this bright red brick, high windows with dark shutters, this like English estate.
It's like a Georgian style house.
Yeah. Iron gates out front, contrasted against this like lush green from the gardens.
Yep. And keep in mind too that he's baling hay, which means everything around it is kind of dead. So this is like out in the middle of like a field.
Yeah, just vast farmland. Well, the house then vanishes into thin air just as suddenly as it had appeared right before his eyes, melting away into nothingness. But the thing is, when he goes back later with a friend to show them this impressive mansion, there's nothing there.
Yep.
It's just gone. This wasn't just a one-time fluke, though. It kind of showed up off and on, but decades later in 1912, his great-grandson, who's named James Cobold, had a similar
D&D class.
Yeah, had a similar harrowing experience. He was in the very same area when the air became frigid. He claimed to hear this loud whooshing sound, as if a ton of air had been abruptly displaced all of a sudden.
Almost like an attic fan.
Yeah. When Cobold and his I'm probably saying it wrong, that when Cobold and his companion looked up, they noticed this huge 3-storied, double-fronted, red brick, Georgian-style house surrounded by lush, blooming gardens, even though just moments before, there had been nothing there but an open expanse of farmland. After a few moments, the house was ensconced with some sort of fog or mist before blinking back out of existence.
Also, when they noticed it, they were Cobold and then his friend, a guy named George Waylett, were riding together. Their horses like reared up and they fell off. And then that's when they like noticed it. So I'm wondering if they just didn't like see it when it actually like appeared.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then the fact that like this fog or mist kind of rolls in and then it just disappears.
Yeah. Which is like kind of a common trait with this one.
People in the area, of course, believe it's not just any ordinary house. The idea is maybe that it only appears under certain conditions, like when the fog rolls in just right, or maybe on a particular day each year. A lot of different theories exist there.
So the friend, George Waylett, actually, so they both saw it, which is a good thing. His friend reacted by saying, that's the third time that I've seen it. James Cobold was kind of surprised, but he went on to tell a magazine in 1975 of his experience and said that he had heard throughout his lifetime, and this was much later when he was an old man, but he had heard people talk that they had seen it like 2 more times before he died.
Okay, guys. Now, also, like I said, it just keeps on popping in and out of existence here. In 1926, a young teacher and her student were walking through the same area when they claimed to have come across a massive house with a wall around it, these imposing iron gates, and lush green gardens. When the teacher later asked local residents about the estate, she was informed that no such home had ever existed anywhere near here. The teacher returned to the area with her student the following spring to find that indeed the house was not there. And we've got a direct quote here. She would say, "My pupil and I did not take the same walk again until the following spring. It was, as far as I can remember, a dull afternoon with good visibility in February or March. We walked up through the farmyard as before and out on the road where suddenly we both stopped dead of one accord and gasped. 'Where's the wall?' we asked simultaneously. It was not there. The road was flanked by nothing but a ditch, and beyond the ditch lay a wilderness of tumbled earth, weeds, mounds, all overgrown with the trees which we had seen on our first visit. We followed the road on round the bend, but there were no gates, no drive, no corner of a house to be seen. We were both very puzzled. At first, we thought that our house and wall had been pulled down since our last visit, but with closer inspection, showed a pond and other small pools amongst the mounds where the house had been visible. It was obvious that they had been there a long time. What's even more bizarre is that she searched and scoured through records, consulted historians, did everything she could to prove that it was real, but there was never any record of a mansion in that location. This actually was written about by a guy named Edward Bennett in his 1934 book, Apparitions and Haunted Houses. Yet another sighting was made by a young man named Edward Bentley in the early 1940s. This was when he was out passing out catalogs along South Hall Street for the clothing store he worked for. He came across this large Georgian-style house set some distance back from the road. He called out to his employer, a Mr. Davies, but by the time he arrived, there was nothing there but brush and weeds, with no sign whatsoever of this grand house that had been seen.
Also, one thing that I didn't really see this with the first sighting, but the Miss Wynn, Ruth Wynn, the teacher, she talks about how it wasn't just like a big house. It was a huge brick, huge gates, and then it leads like down like a long driveway up to where this like sort of estate would be. So we're not just talking about a house. We're talking like a full sort of gated big property, sort of almost like how you would imagine like the Biltmore House here in Nashville, like that kind of thing. Yeah,
and I think the first guy that may have seen it, Robert Palfrey in the 1860s, I think he was on the other side of this area. You see what I'm saying? Like he was within the iron gates, whereas these folks kind of looking at it from the outside. Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah. Because this guy says it. The reason I bring that up is because this guy dropping off these like, clothing catalogs, Edward Bentley, he noticed that like the gates were shut to like the long driveway. So he was thinking like, maybe I can come back and find a way to let me in so that I could talk with the owner. So when he comes back, it's completely gone.
Man, I mean, I can't wait to talk about this. I know. But like, that would make me feel like a crazy person.
Yeah.
One
of the things that's interesting, and Ruth Wynn, the teacher again, she mentions that when they saw it again in the spring, there was no house, but there was what sort of appeared to be like piles of like overgrowth, like huge bramble bushes, almost like what you would imagine is like ivy or like, here in the States, like kudzu. And it was almost like it was like in like a big pile, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
Because that means that like, if you imagine, a house like just suddenly like teleporting, like an old abandoned house, all this like overgrowth would just kind of collapse on itself and just be a big pile.
Well, not to mention the fact that there was a pond
right
in the place and not like a, I mean, is it feasible that a house, an old English estate, and again, like it's hard for me because I watched this movie a million times, not to just immediately like think of the movie The Gentleman, the Guy Ritchie movie, and these like
so
English estates, and every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, I love those.
Have you seen the show, by the way?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you got to watch it. Okay. It's awesome.
Anyway, the fact that like it's not out of this world to think that maybe somebody just came in, leveled the property, for whatever reason, decided to fill that space with a pond. But this is now, we're talking about almost 100 years of this thing being sighted. Now, here's what's crazy. Suffolk seems to have had a good number of these sightings of mysterious phantom houses roaming about all over the place, especially in this area that's called the Rougham. And so this has earned these, sort of phantom houses, the nickname, the Mirage of Rougham.
Right. So this does continue on throughout history. So we're in the 70s now. The house was experienced again. There was a girl named Sandra Hardwick who was 14. She was cycling home after meeting a friend in the summer. It was just about dark, and she was almost to her home when she saw 2 bungalows in front of her. But then just to the right of them, she saw a very large red-bricked Georgian-style house that was all lit up, though the summer midday sun was out, which I find that really interesting.
Yeah, especially since we haven't heard of it
being like...
Yeah, lit.
Lit, yeah.
People
like
inside, potentially.
Yeah, like in use kind of thing. Although, man, even just hearing that, does it not remind you of like the Holiday House in The Thief of Always?
Dude, have I already told you about The Thief of Always?
What are you talking about?
Woodrow's reading it, dude.
Oh, is it like a manga kind of thing?
No. The other day, he's like, man, I'm looking for a book. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got one that I think you're going to love.
Oh, it couldn't. That's the best book of all time.
Yeah.
So good. But yeah, so it's like, it's in the middle of summer. The sun is like, it's about to be dark. All the lights are on. And she, of course, like all the others, said the atmosphere felt very cold and there was a fog around it. But she notes, which I think this may be unique to her account, is she said that everything was like completely silent. So again, this is in the summer, the sun's going down. You would think if you're out in the middle of, rural countryside, you would hear frogs and wildlife, but nothing, completely silent. We're making our way to the 80s. A daughter of the rector who lived in Rougham Green Rectory ran into the local pub to tell her patrons that she had seen a huge Georgian house, and it had scared her so much that she was in tears. Another interesting note to add is that the teacher, Miss Ruth Wynn, who saw the disappearing house in the 20s, had also been living in the rectory at the time when she had her experience. So that's interesting.
Man.
It's like, what is there like some kind of connection there, And then I think you have
more
possibly
modern
the most
ones.
recent.
Yeah. So this phenomenon has also been reported well into our own modern times, even including as recently as 2007, when Jean Batram and her husband were driving through Suffolk along King's Hall Street in Rougham near Berry Street, Edmonds. A lot of directions there just for our, English listeners, just in case you want to try to spy this thing. When they see this, again, stately Georgian house, complete with a picturesque blooming garden, on their way back, they wanted to see this stunningly beautiful house again, but it proved to be gone. Nothing but a field where it had stood before. She would later learn of the area's history of sightings and of ghostly houses, and Batram would say of her experience, she said, I know I saw this house. I can see it now and I could sketch it if I needed to. It was a lovely, big Georgian house with a whole row of long windows and trees at the back of it. I have talked to other people and they have heard of it, and people in Rougham have heard of the tale. I would just love to get to the bottom of it. At the time it happened, I knew nothing about this house at all. I was looking across some plowed fields when I noticed this great big house and remarked to my husband how nice it was. I had a quick look and saw these lovely big windows and then thought I would see it again when I came back. But when we drove back, there was no house there. The spectral house of Suffolk has been covered in numerous publications on the paranormal, including books Spectral Suffolk by Chris Jensen Romer, Eric Quigley, and Nicola Talbot. Long list, just have one person. As well as The Ghost of Suffolk by Betty Puttick. So this is an occurrence in that area that is, well, at least as long as it's been documented, has been happening since the 1800s. We're now into, the most recent that I could find, 2007.
Which I think I did run across one in 2014, but I think somebody went over to try to like debunk it or investigate, and I'm not sure that they found anything. But they also noted that it looked like sort of the overgrowth was kind of like piled up, which is one of my favorite parts about this.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's just so bizarre.
So there is evidence that there had been a large house built close to where the sightings had happened. There was in 18th century maps, there was a large estate or house that was called King's Hall, but there are no records of it ever being like a Georgian style house, specifically in the area where people are talking about. I mean, it would have been close, but we're talking, miles kind of thing. As it would have been built by somebody who had many riches, and there would have been records to show this, but there, unfortunately, are none.
Wow.
There also, apparently, there have been fragments found of a yellow and green wall, but I don't know where that's like.
Yeah, how that plays into it.
Yeah, how that plays out even.
Man, I know what everyone might be thinking, because we do talk a lot about on this show how everything kind of cool like this tends to happen in England and Europe and in these countries that have been around for a lot longer than ours, our young country, right?
Yeah.
And you might be thinking that. But we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we're going to dive into some of this weird stuff that's happening in our neck of the woods.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
With Uber Reserve, good things come to those who plan ahead. Family vacay? Reserve your ride as soon as you book your flights. To all the planners, now you can reserve your Uber ride up to 90 days in advance. See Uber app for details.
So, you want to be a marketer. It's easy. You just have to score a ton of leads and figure out a way to turn them all into customers. Plus, manage a dozen channels, write a million blogs, and launch 100 campaigns all at once. When that's done, simply make your socials go viral and bring in record profits. No sweat. Okay, fine. It's a lot of sweat. But with HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools, launching benchmark-breaking campaigns is easier than ever. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
The holiday season officially starts when you get that first card in the mail. Shutterfly makes it easy to add more meaning to the everyday with hundreds of holiday card designs that can be personalized in seconds with your favorite photos from this year. Select your greeting, customize the color, and even add little extras like personalized foil to make a holiday card that really shines. Enjoy 40% off with code SMILE40 at Shutterfly.com and send something meaningful this year. See site for more details.
Blinds.com is kicking off the savings early with Black Friday mega deals all month long. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can even handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for just one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 45% on select styles, plus a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you?
Is anyone out there?
We're fighters for truth, justice, then they better commit.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. All right, now this next story takes us across the pond, close to our neck of the woods in Virginia. This tale can be found in a book called The Big Book of Virginia Ghost Stories by L.B. Taylor and concerns a witness by the name of Kathleen Louisa of Falls Church, Virginia. Now, we've said this time and time again on the show, but Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky even, Pennsylvania, there's like a strip of land, in a pretty large strip of land if you really do it that way, that is just, it's just ripe for this kind of stuff. And I don't know, I will say it's interesting that it's happening, a lot of this stuff happens in the original 13 colonies of the states. Just saying. Okay.
Ooh, man.
So Miss Louisa claims that she had driven past an old manor called the Stone House, and it was situated near Sudley Road. She'd driven by it many times and had always wondered about its history. The house was located amongst some of the old battlefields of the American Civil War and was absolutely steeped in history, as well as being a common landmark in the area. One night, in 1986, Louisa went out to one of the old battlefields along with her mother and grandparents in order to gaze upon the passing Halley's Comet. But as they approached the intersection where the stone house should have been, it simply wasn't there. The baffled witnesses turned the car around and were finally able to locate an empty lot where the house should have been standing, yet there was not a scrap to suggest it had ever been there at all in this weed-choked lot.
Wow.
The only thing that remained were the well and some fences. The folks, of course, were just absolutely puzzled and figured that the house must have been unexpectedly torn down or relocated sometime very recently without their awareness, even though it seemed as if the lot of land was relatively untouched and did not display the sort of activity that one would expect from, such a project. There was no rubble, no scars in the earth from machinery or vehicles, the things that would be necessary to move an entire house. There's no holes in the ground, no foundation walls. It seemed to be merely a lonely expanse of land that had remained there, open to the elements for some time. The only sign at all that there had ever been anything there was the well leading down into the dark. So this group of folks milled about for some time, trying to figure out what had happened before essentially deciding to continue on. 2 weeks later, the same group drove by the same intersection, only to be baffled once again, because the house was there. They all swore that they had seen the empty lot, and they were equally confused as to how the house could be there this time. Miss Louisa would insist that she'd been living in the area her whole life and had definitely not made any mistakes about the location. In the same book was another odd story concerning the stone house. This time it was the testimony of a Beverly Kish from Merrifield, Virginia. She claims that in January of 1997, she had her own unusual experience concerning the structure. And she said, "I experienced a ghostly encounter of sorts in January 1997. But I didn't know about it until I read about the lady, Louisa, who said she drove by the location of the stone house and the house had disappeared. The same thing happened to me. I was living in Manassas at the time and wanted to take a drive one night. It was clear with the moon out. It wasn't pitch dark. I was alone. Having lived in the area 20 years, I knew exactly where the stone house is. In fact, I took a tour there a couple years ago. Yet on this night, it was gone. I even turned the car around and said to myself, that's funny. I'm at the right intersection. And all I saw was a patch of grass with the glow of the moon on it where the house should have been. And you can't miss this house. It's close to the road. So I can personally vouch for what the other woman saw, or rather, for what she didn't see." Locals say that this stone house is a mystery that only reveals itself to people when it chooses. But they also say, if you ever step inside, you might not come back. Which is an absolute other piece of this that I didn't even think about really until reading through these stories. What happens if you go inside?
Yeah.
All right. Last but definitely not least here, we're going to head over to Illinois to a hotel called Lincoln Lodge. I'm just kidding, dude.
I believe it.
Oh, I don't know what episode we talked about the Lincoln Lodge, but please, listeners, go and find it. One of the craziest, scariest nights
that
we had. I mean, we were pretty certain we were going to get murdered, but we didn't have any choice. Anyway, all right. This is a place near White Cemetery along Cuba Road. This area has a serious reputation of ghostly lights, phantom cars, and perhaps the strangest of all, though, is what supposedly lies along a side street called Rainbow Road. The area was previously the home of an abandoned mansion estate that was so expansive that it has frequently been claimed to have been an old asylum that has gates that inexplicably change position. The estate sits right by the infamous White Cemetery, which dates back to at least the 1820s and is known for numerous hauntings and bizarreness, including, like I said, phantom vehicles. I know you like this one. Dancing orbs of light, shadowy wraiths, and one particular house can certainly add to this. It is said that there is a modest shack that occasionally will appear in the woods right next to the cemetery. And it's inhabited by an elderly woman who is sometimes reported as holding a lantern. It is said that if one is to approach the house, it will simply vanish into thin air, along with anyone who happens to be too close to it when it does. The house is often reported as being wreathed in spectral flames as well, leading to the theory that it is perhaps a ghost structure that was somehow imprinted onto the area in the wake of a tragedy. Maybe something like we talk about the stone tape theory, something like that. Energies that, in any kind of like high emotion, any kind of event that, oh my God.
What was that?
Siri.
Jeez.
Hold on. How did that happen? I didn't say anything that sounded like that. That scared the absolute out of me. Right as I'm saying like disappeared, it's like, I didn't get that. Where was I? Oh yeah, any kind of heightened emotion event. The theory is that like it can kind of imprint that, into reality or whatever. Okay, so theoretically, they think that it might have been a fire that most likely took the dwelling's occupant with it.
Meaning like the lady with the
the lady with the lantern. Maybe it was like that her house burned down. Maybe she burned it down with the lantern.
That's exactly where I was going.
So that kind of wraps up this house here in Illinois off of Cuba Road, this strange little cabin. And it kind of brings us into time to kind of talk about what we think is going on here. Well, I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about real quick before we do that?
No. I think that I just wanted to say earlier, I do think that's kind of one of my theories with this as well, that it's like, who's to say that, anytime we've brought up like the stone tape theory and this idea of, these high emotion events, we think of people leaving an imprint, so you hear like, oh, if you go to Gettysburg on this day or at this night, you'll see, these three soldiers or whatever. I mean, who's to say that the house also doesn't imprint? You know what I mean? I do think it's a little, I don't think it totally like satisfies me as far as like, as an explanation, but I do think that it could be, there could be elements of that are true.
Let me just throw some stuff into this theory soup that we're going to be making here. All right. Have these structures somehow been etched into the location through some mysterious means, as if kind of like we're talking about, like almost like an image that's burned on film, or like an old school film negative. Now I know all of our listeners know what that is, but kids our kids' age are just like, what?
No idea.
Can a place have the memory of this house you know, even if it's long gone. Are these instances of time slips, like those ladies in Versailles, in which like these different scenes from different eras become visible for just a brief amount of time? Could it even be parallel realities that are bleeding over into our own? You know, these houses being somewhat like from another dimension, temporarily sort of like crossing over into our own, or perhaps the people, for whatever reason, that area, the veil is sort of thin and they can kind of see this thing. Is it just mistakes? Are people mistaken? Is it a mirage, like they call it? Is it a memory glitch?
Yeah.
Is it evidence of, not the Matrix, but like simulation?
Yeah, I think you're getting there.
You know, or I don't know. It's just hard when you're not talking about like a ghost of a person. Now I know that one in Illinois is kind of an exception here,
right?
But when you're talking about a physical house as a phantom, you know.
Well, I don't know. I do find that interesting. I find it interesting that, you know, kind of like The Holiday House and The Thief of Always. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's by Clive Barker. It's amazing. And it would be perfect for this time of year. But it's the idea that, similar to the concept in like the movie Nope, where it's like, oh, the UFO is the thing. Like maybe the house is like the trap, the lure, so that somebody goes in, and then that's, you know, the end.
Yeah, almost like if you're a listener that knows anything about mimics in Dungeons and Dragons, things that can basically appear like an object that we're used to. And that's kind of another theory that, I mean, frankly, until you said that, I didn't even think about in terms of, you know, we always talk about disembodied voices.
Exactly.
Tim Marchenko, go and pick it up. It's absolutely worth every single penny. One of the best books I've ever read. We're not sponsored by Tim. One of these days we're going to get him. Yeah, no. One of these days we're going to get him on the show because it really is just one of the greatest books. It's just absolutely fascinating.
Yep.
But we talk about, you know, things being able to mimic voice and mimic the auditory sense.
And in a lot of ways you'll hear like doppelganger stories.
Sure. Of people and that kind of thing. But this is next level, dude. If you're thinking about it in terms of if something had the capability to create this illusion of it being a house, luring you in.
Yeah.
And maybe it's one of those things that became less successful, like after a while. In other words, maybe this worked back in the, you know, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s.
Right.
People would be like, what's this now? And they'd walk up in there.
Yeah.
And then they're, you know, disappear. What I was going to say is real quick, over time, people are just kind of like passing by it. And then that entity or whatever that's trying to use that as a trap is just like, oh man, didn't work. And then they'd stop doing that, you know.
Then the energy, it doesn't have enough power to kind of continue living.
We'll return after these messages.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
This is Joshua Cutchin, and you're at my home for weirdness. That would be rad.
One thing that this reminded me of was this concept that was kind of big, like, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, where you started hearing about it a lot, was these like sort of random staircases out in the woods. Have you heard of this?
No.
So, and it is funny because I remember specifically like when I first read about this, I mean, this was a long time ago. I remember thinking, that is weird. I remember several specific staircases like on the property that my family would own that we played in as kids. And, you know, you always kind of chalk it up to, you know, at one time there was a house here and this is all that's left. But the idea is that it just, a lot of that doesn't make sense. So it's just that it's this concept that, and I think originally it came from people seeing these things in like national parks and stuff. And if we know anything about national parks, we know, and you're into the paranormal, you think like David Paulides and Missing 411. But we're talking like 30, 40, 50 miles, hikers out in the middle of nowhere where it's a national park, it's federal land, and there's just like staircases. Some of them are like just wood, which to me, hearing that it's wood, it doesn't make sense that, that would just be, originally there was a cabin there and now it's not there and it's just a staircase. It's like,
especially like old school ones, like, in our area, it's not too uncommon for you to just kind of be tromping through the woods and see like an old stone fireplace that's just in the middle of the woods.
Chimney.
And like, a little bit of an outline of an old stone foundation.
Yeah.
And then that's going to last the test of time. Wooden staircase.
Yeah. And we're also, not always wooden. Some of them are like concrete, stone. But the interesting thing is it's not, to your point, it's not like they're just sort of in shambles, kind of crumbling. We're talking like complete staircases. And one of the things I remember reading years later, but this was still several years back, where this person was talking about, they were talking about the staircases, and then they sort of tied this to the idea of like liminal spaces. Do you know what that is?
I've heard, I've remind us all. Like, I know what that is, but like, explain it, pretend that I don't.
Explain it to me like I'm a first grader. No, it's sort of the places that are like in between. So like, I always kind of think of like Weave World. I know that none of you are going to get that, but you know what I mean? How they would tie in those like sort of little nooks and crannies in the landscape that they loved, and then they would like roll them up in this tapestry kind of thing. But anyway, liminal spaces are like kind of like the places in between. And there's a whole sort of like subsect that you can get into with like liminal spaces, and like they talk about it on Hellier and all that stuff. But this guy was talking about how he was researching like the fae and fairies and stuff, and he found this crazy old, like book where, and it was probably, there's a book called The Secret Commonwealth that was written by like an Irish or Scottish preacher, like, 1600s or something.
Yeah.
Where he was talking about these fairy abductions, and he said that the fairies were only able to abduct people in these liminal spaces. So neither upstairs or downstairs, neither in nor out. And so it's interesting if you think about even these staircases being like traps, because it's like, okay, you're climbing a staircase that goes nowhere, and it's like that's the trap. Because you think, like, especially if you're a kid, you think like, oh wow, there's a cool staircase in the middle of the woods, I'm gonna climb it.
Yeah. Well, okay, I thought you were going a different direction. I do like that idea.
Where did you think I was going?
See, I thought you were going to say, because you can't be abducted upstairs. Say the quote again.
So you could only be abducted in the, actually, hold on, you know what? I ran across.
And by the way, Jacques Vallée talks about this in his Passport to Magonia.
Okay, so it says, which is so weird that I was able to like find this, because this came out 9 years ago, and I found it yesterday. It says, doorways and stairs, when you're in between two floors or places, that's where fae folk can grab you and take you away.
Okay.
It's about being between two places, neither one or the other.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. I misinterpreted what you'd said, and I thought that this stair, in other words, like I thought it was the opposite, where they can kind of get you either if you're downstairs or upstairs, and so they like abduct that entire household, and all that's left is the staircase. But, that's not what you said, so irrelevant.
Well, yeah, but you really can go down the rabbit trail on this staircase thing. And honestly, it may be cool if we did like a full episode on it, because there's so many like Reddit accounts and stuff. And it is weird because you think like as a kid, like you said, tromping in the woods and walking around. It was actually pretty common that you'd run across like staircases, and And like, I don't know, you just never really...
You've run across staircases before?
Oh, dude, I've ran across numerous staircases like on the property that I would play in as a kid.
Well, and when we say staircase, are you talking about like stone steps like that cut into the land, or are you talking about like used to be a home here staircases? Making it up.
No. Well, that's what we always just assumed. And up until me reading about this like several, like, 10 plus years ago, I didn't even know it was like a thing.
Well, I'm saying like there's a difference between, landscaping stairs.
No. I'm talking about like, if you imagine a house just disappearing and all that's left is a full staircase that goes up in the middle of the
air
forest.
And stuff.
Into the air, yeah.
Hanging there.
You've never heard of this?
No, and I've also never seen this before with my own eyes.
Oh, I've seen like numerous ones, but I didn't know it was like anything remotely paranormal until I ran across this stuff. I would
immediately think that because I'd be like, why the heck is there a stupid staircase? That's so bizarre. I've never heard of that before.
Oh yeah, it's like a whole thing. There's like tons and tons and tons of yeah, dude, look at this. Hold on.
Well, I mean, I agree with you that we need to do an episode on this. However, if we entitle it The Staircase, people are going to think we're talking about the guy. Well, he would go to the pool and drink a bottle of wine. And, yeah.
Yeah, dude, it's a full thing.
Jeez, man.
Yeah, this is a thing.
Now, I will say some of these, like some of them look really, really old. Some of them look kind of old.
Well, that's the thing.
It's so like, bizarre, dude.
Yeah, it's
no
super
way.
weird.
You've seen this in...
I swear on my life, I've seen...
Making it up.
Pretty sure
hey, folks, making it up.
I'm not making it up. I'm pretty sure I could find one that's made out of stone on my family's property.
Well, you got to go find it, and you got to take a picture of it because no way, dude.
No, I swear to you.
No, I'm not saying that I don't... it's not that I don't believe you. I just, at the same time, I don't believe you.
But again, and I'm the guy who wants to tie everything into the paranormal, but I never, ever thought of it as any sort of paranormal thing. I always just thought,
maybe that's the most frightening thing, because then you just be like,
exactly.
I mean, hey, let me take a picture on these stairs. Bump, 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 bump.
Yeah.
What if you're just like, hey, I found it. We both go up there, and I'm like, fine, I'm just going to test it because I don't think that's real. And then poof, I vanish, dude.
I mean, that's pretty.
It's a great way to start a book. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'm seeing what's funny is I just showed Woody these like photos, these image search of like staircase in the woods, and there's a ton. And apparently, I'm seeing that there's a book actually called The Staircase in the Woods by Chuck Wendig. And just like you were saying before, we have not read it.
Man alive, that's
spectacular. Yeah, it's I don't know. I for some reason I tied those two things together, and I think that there's something interesting about the idea of the people seeing like the Rougham Mirage or the Suffolk house. The idea that when they wouldn't see it, some people were seeing that overgrowth, almost like when it disappeared, it kind of fell into itself, you know?
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, something about that imagery in my mind, like, connected to the like, sort of, staircases in the woods, which I don't know. To me, it's very sort of high strangeness. I don't understand, like, what exactly is going on, but yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it doesn't really seem like a hoax. Some of the more modern-looking ones, even then, I mean, there's like one of these pictures, folks, is like a spiral staircase.
Mm-hmm.
To me, in the middle of the woods.
I think the creepiest one is the one that's like...
With like the stone frame around it?
Yeah, like what is that?
I don't know. It's almost like a Frank Lloyd Wright style staircase.
Very sort of grotesque, postmodern kind of, like just out in the middle of the woods. I did run across this Reddit post where this guy is a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service, and he says, he gives this like little event that I don't know. It's interesting to hear that it's like such a common thing with these guys. He says, this is the last one I'll tell, and it's probably the weirdest story I have. Now, I don't know if this is true in every SIR unit, but in mine, it's sort of an unspoken regular thing that we run into. You can try asking about it with other SAR officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say much about it. We've been told not to talk about it by our superiors, and at this point, we've all gotten used to it, that it doesn't even seem weird anymore. On just about every case where we're really far into the wilderness, I'm talking 30 to 40 miles, at some point we will find a staircase in the middle of the woods. It's almost like if you took the stairs in your house, cut them out, and put them in the forest. I asked about it the first time I saw some, and the other officer just told me not to worry about it, that it was normal. Everyone I asked about said the same thing. I wanted to go check them out, but I was told very emphatically that I should never go near any of them. I just sort of ignore them now when I run into them because it happens so frequently. So,
Man.
I don't know, it's interesting, you know?
You know, we talk about like, hey, don't pick up this object if you find it in the woods and bring it home with you because you never know. Mm-hmm. We talk about, you know, this, I mean, now it's like, if you see a staircase in the woods, don't go up it.
Don't do it.
I mean, in terms of what we think is going on here, I think there's just so many different things that could be going on here. Mm-hmm. It could be these folks may have, I don't know. It's just hard because so many of these stories involve, so in other words, okay, real quick. The story about the teacher that's not even from the area, she sees it, maybe she was mistaken. Okay, I can give you that one. Mm-hmm. What about the folks that have lived in an area their entire lives? The thing that I could not stop thinking about reading that story, Tyler, was, you know, that mill kind of close to where y'all were from, you and Ann?
Oh, yeah. On Cooley Woods Road.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And I'm not even from there, but that's what I thought of. I thought about a landmark like that that everybody knows about.
And then
everyone has like its own, like even legend, that one does.
Yeah.
You know? And imagine you wanting to show like your kids that, or me for the first time. I think that's how I saw it. You guys, we rode out there and I was like, yeah, that is pretty creepy.
Which, you know,
and
the
then
story,
it just being
though.
gone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, it's like something that's so sort of hardwired in, like you immediately can like recall it in your brain, you know.
And the disappearance part is one thing, right? You'd be like, I mean, honestly, realistically, nowadays, it'd be like, oh man, they must have torn it down, right? But then you come back and it's back there again. Now that's the part that you're like, that it would be very difficult to kind of wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
And it would be almost improbable that that would happen to somebody that is from the area, sees this thing all the time, has grown up with this landmark.
Which I think the even more weird sort of take on the story is if you're used to nothing being there and then suddenly there's a giant estate mansion with lights, all the lights are on inside, and it's just like, I don't know. It's like,
and then it vanishes.
Yeah, and then it's gone also. It's so weird.
It's hard for me not to think that it is some sort of glitch in between dimensions kind of thing. I don't think I'll say like I'm leaning more towards that than it sort of just being like an imprinted. And again, all of them are similar, but they're different in enough ways that they could each have their own sort of cause. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But for me, the sort of theory that I'm leaning most towards is that sort of glitch in the dimensions. And for whatever reason, at that moment, I don't know. It's also scary because then it's like if you see something from another dimension and you think you're walking in the direction that you're supposed to, and then you keep on walking or whatever, it disappears. You're like, oh man, that was weird. I got to go home. Have you now been transported to like a third dimension option? Is that why we now have like, does that happen continuously to us? Is that why we think, it makes me think of the Mandela effect. It makes me think of like all these other things.
Yeah.
Because in that theory, one of the things that really, you know, when we go back and listen to the Mandela effect episode, because you'll learn why I'm kind of no good. Because in terms of, hey, do you remember this? It's like, dude, I grew up overseas. I was surrounded by pirated stuff. Doritos, they had a fake Doritos. They called it Happy Toes. You know what I'm saying?
Oh boy.
It's like...
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 1, Episode 26, the Mega Mandela Effect episode.
So I'm terrible with that part. But the thing that we talked about in that first sort of season of our show a lot was with every single choice that we make daily, every second of the day, when we make any specific choice, there's an infinite number of possibilities that we could have done. And so if you're going in that direction and with that in mind, then that then means there's sort of like an infinite number of different ways that your day, your life,
or like outcomes.
Different outcomes, but also like everything, your life could end up differently, like not on the, well, I mean, it could on a daily scale, but like in a broader sense over time, your life can be completely different than it would have been, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you imagine all of those sort of possibilities sort of existing at once, right? And for some reason, us being able to see through whatever it is that divides us in between those possibilities, those infinite possibilities and quote unquote dimensions, man, have we accidentally kind of like ended up in another one? Did this person do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's wild to think about, man. But that's what I'm leaning most towards in most of these instances.
So another thing that's really interesting to me that where my mind went with this is the idea of two things. One, the immediate like cold sensation. I mean, I guess technically three. And there's like a whooshing sound, but mainly the fog. And where my mind went with that was something that I think I know that I briefly talked about it. I don't think we've ever fully went into it, but it's this idea of electric fog. Do you remember that, Woody?
Briefly, I mean, not really.
Okay, so electric fog is based on, or it's typically you hear it talked about in regards to the Bermuda Triangle. I ran into this article on physics forums where it talks about these reports share a common thread of a cloud or fog with electric and or magnetic effects, but no lightning. One such report from 1904 describes a British steamer, the Mohican, being enveloped in a metallic vapor with a magnetic effect on the vessel. In a similar account in 1966, a tugboat captain experienced electrical failures and a dense fog with boiling seas. The cause of these phenomena is completely unclear, but theories suggest a release of frozen CO2 or a volcanic seismic event on the sea bottom. The occurrence of St. Elmo's fire in these reports also raises questions about the role, but there are a number of similar reports that I've seen about alleged electric fog. One where a pilot describes, basically it's the idea that, and you hear it with like pilots, especially like back in 50s and 60s and stuff, where you would hear like first all their equipment starts failing. Even just their compass, their sort of analog, equipment starts going haywire. It starts spinning. They don't know which way is up or down. And it's almost like a bubble that sort of like envelops their craft. You know what I mean? I know we've talked about it.
Yes, for sure.
So the idea with me is like, okay, maybe that is like some sort of like dimensional energy. Back in the old days, like, and it's something that, oddly enough, I actually still believe that there could be something to it, and it was the belief that like Earth was sort of surrounded by. I mean, now they talk about like dark matter and like dark energy and stuff like that, but we used to just call it the ether, and it was kind of this like soup that everything existed inside, but that soup was actually almost like a background medium, and it could be like charged, or it could be sort of like it could be like accelerated. Like there's ways to like manipulate, or that was the thought like back in the day. Like Tesla believed in the ether and stuff, and so I wonder if there's something that's like activate. If we're looking at the ether being a real thing in this particular place, maybe something is like charging up the ether in this area. And so, or like even with Stephen King, he talks about like the thinny or something. He talks about these areas where sort of the fabric between dimensions or between like universes is like thin. So that's why you can see, I think in The Dark Tower, he talks about that, where it almost looks like you're looking through like a dirty window. into the next dimension. With this, it's kind of hard to explain, especially like the Rougham Mirage, because all of the accounts seem very, very, very clear, and it's not like this sort of warbling kind of mirage. It's like a real, you could count the windows, you could, all the lights are on, like certain little details lead me to believe that no, I think it is going in and out of like maybe dimensions, but I do think there's something with like that fog that kind of like rolls in anytime that you see it. And even like, I don't know, maybe the sensation if you're physically close to the fog or the electric fog, maybe the sensation is like a freezing kind of, effect. And maybe that's the thing that's creating that whooshing sound,
Yeah. It's interesting, man. And I remember now when we talked about this, it was that story about the guy that flew from, I think, in between Australia and Tasmania. Remember? And then he just kind of got lost.
Yeah.
And we kind of discussed the phenomenon that pilots kind of go into. And I mean...
Oh, and dude, I didn't even think about that. That, remember, you have like the audio from that?
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 15, UFOs of the Land Down Under, Part 3.
And you hear him like talking, but then you hear like a crazy loud noise. Like, I wonder if that's like the whooshing or ripping sound that you hear.
Yeah, I mean...
That's crazy.
Yeah. Plus, these people are describing the whooshing sound in 1912 or 1920,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's like, do they know what static sounds like at that point anyway?
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Man... Yeah, I mean, I'm like you. I think it's something along those lines of, but I will say the one in Illinois, that one kind of, for me, leans more toward that sort of imprint of history, because there's a ghost involved. Or it can all just be some sort of, stuff that we kind of talk about in relation to Jacques Vallée and even where the footprints end and Tim Marchenko's Disembodied Voices, where maybe it's some sort of like Fey crossing area. Yeah, I'm not sure, man. It's bizarre as heck. And like my favorite thing about this is there's the spookiness element of it, of course. But there's also that like just really weird stuff. This really reminds me of things that we would read in a lot of these like ghost story type books as kids. And to see that these things still are kind of taking place. And now to learn about these dadgum staircases in the middle of the woods.
Oh, yeah.
I mean...
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
One thing that this led me to was, if you're a listener that's been listening for a while, there was an episode a while back where I finally, me and my daughter both, we had an apport, sort of experience. An apport is a thing where something suddenly just sort of comes into reality. And I know it sounds nuts, but all that to say, my daughter and I both, I just made dinner. We were sitting down at the table. We're watching TV. I think I was trying to find something on TV to watch while we were going to eat. And I have a 2-story living room, and from up in the middle of the room somewhere, I don't know, a little cheap metal key fell from 2 stories up and landed on the floor. We both got up, we both walked over and stared at each other like, what the heck was that? And immediately I was thinking, I've read about this phenomenon for years, and we finally experienced it. I would not have believed this unless it had happened to me. However, in doing research for this, it did kind of make me think, what if, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. First off, in this research, I discovered an actual thing that is called disappearing object phenomenon. And that's basically this phenomenon where things just disappear and there's some sort of invisible forces at play. So basically it's like, I would like to say we've probably all experienced this, whether it is mundane or whether it's paranormal, but it's these sort of situation where you're in a small space, not really many hiding places, and something just seems to just completely disappear. You're searching all over, you're looking under the bed, you're looking, lifting the furniture, and you just cannot find it. And then suddenly it just shows up exactly where you would have looked, like, in a few hours, the next day, something like that. It made me think of the airport sort of experience that Ellie and I had. And it's weird because maybe the airport is the answer to the disappearing object phenomenon. Like maybe somebody else is trying to get into like a little jewelry box and they set down their little cheap metal key and suddenly they come back and their key's gone. But in my reality or in my time or in my, universe, suddenly that little key fell out of her existence and just falls 2 stories onto my living room floor.
Man.
And so I don't exactly know how it connects, but I do feel like there could be something there with these houses. Like maybe they're, so when these witnesses are talking about them seeing this estate, seeing the Rougham Mirage, maybe there's another another dimension or another existence where somebody is suddenly looking at it and then it disappears. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like maybe it's sort of existing.
The opposite exists somewhere else.
Right. Which is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Man, it's so bizarre to think about.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
I think ultimately, man, when thinking about this, before we go, I just wanted to say, folks, next time you're walking down an old road, maybe it's one that you're familiar with, maybe you're on vacation and you're just taking a quick morning jog or walk or
jaunt,
wanting to take in the scenery and see the area, and you spot like a building that either looks interesting and beautiful or something potentially doesn't seem right, maybe think twice about going on in. If there's a staircase, maybe think twice about just stepping on in it. Maybe take a picture just in case, because who knows what it might look like the next time you come by there.
Mm-hmm. And if you have your own story or pictures, even better, go ahead and tell us over on Instagram. If it's a longer story, shoot us a DM or shoot it over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Or if you're brave, you may make it into a future episode. And to do that, head on over to thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can leave basically a voice memo and tell the story in your own words. And, it'll be given proper That Would Be Rad treatment with sound design and all that. And you'll become a part of That Would Be Rad history. If you would like to support us, head on over to our Patreon, The Rabbit Trail. It really helps keep this train on the tracks. It's a lot of work. Everything that you see, all the design, all the sound design, all the mixing, all the editing, anything visual or audio that you see or hear, it's all done by us, just 2 guys, Woody and I. So it really helps, and it's such a great way to support the show. Tell a single friend about the show or give us 5-star reviews when you have the time. It makes a big difference. And I guess that's it. I mean, I'm going to say I feel kind of sad that I'm not going to be saying stay spooky at the end.
Yeah, I know.
But I guess that's about it. You got anything else, Woody?
I think that's it, man. Stay spooky.
Well, we love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. You're my favorite song on in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead, for you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now